Imagine a company like a massive global brand, and they make a marketing decision so disastrous that it just wipes out billions of dollars in market value overnight.
Right, just totally tanks.
Yeah, exactly. It alienates their core customer base, sales plummet, and everyone looking at the situation from the outside thinks the exact same thing. They think, well, they made a really stupid financial mistake.
Because we assume profit is the only motive.
Right. But what if making money wasn't the goal at all? What if that company was perfectly willing to torch billions of dollars in revenue because they were, buying something else entirely?
Something that's basically invisible to anyone who only looks at the world through the lens of a quarterly earnings report.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are unpacking a truly unique and honestly massive set of source materials. We're looking at this sprawling, deeply detailed chat transcript.
Yeah, it's a fascinating exchange.
It really is. It's a real conversation between a human user, someone who is clearly trying to make sense of a world that feels just increasingly chaotic and hostile to them, and an advanced AI.
And what makes this source so compelling is not just the topics they cover, but the sheer scale of the analysis. They aren't just talking about daily news.
No, they're going deep.
They are mapping the entire architecture of modern society. They trace out the breakdown of everyday human communication, the structural destruction of the middle class, the rise of a new global elite, and even this fundamental philosophical shift in how we define human freedom.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to take these massive sociological and historical frameworks and figure out why the world feels so divided.
Right.
Like, why does the modern workplace feel like a minefield? Why are people working harder than ever just to feel entirely financially insecure?
And how do massive global systems coordinate without some secret cabal pulling the strings in a volcano lair?
Yes, exactly, the volcano layer question. But before we begin, we do need to set some boundaries for our discussion today.
Definitely.
The sources we are analyzing touch on highly charged political and social topics. We are talking about feminism, civil rights, globalism, corporate power, you name it.
These are deep-seated cultural realignments.
Yeah, and I want to be incredibly clear with you listening right now. We are not taking sides on these issues.
Not at all.
We are acting strictly as your impartial guides. Our goal is just to unpack the historical and sociological frameworks presented in this specific text. We want to examine the mechanics of these arguments objectively.
Precisely. We are just mapping the terrain that the text presents to us.
So let's start at the micro level. Let's look at how human beings are just, failing to talk to one another.
It's a huge theme in the transcript.
It is. Because the user starts with this deeply relatable scenario. He was working in a university research department, mostly surrounded by female colleagues.
Right.
And occasionally, a really highly charged moral debate would dominate the news cycle. He specifically mentions things like scandals involving terrible allegations of child abuse.
Really heavy stuff.
Yeah. And he would try to do what I think a lot of highly analytical people do. He would try to impartially explain the different sides of the debate.
He put up this massive verbal shield.
Exactly. He'd say, look, I'm going to explain each side. I don't necessarily support any of this. I'm simply outlining the architecture of their arguments.
He was trying to engage in pure, detached information exchange. He wanted to neutrally outline the rationale behind a position, even a morally repugnant one, just to dissect how the argument worked.
But it backfired spectacularly. He found that his colleagues were profoundly confused by his stance.
And worse, they often walked away believing he actually supported the terrible things he was describing.
Yeah, he was totally baffled. He literally says in the text that he started to suspect his colleagues were maliciously pretending to be confused just to ruin his reputation.
It is a completely disorienting experience. But what's fascinating here is how the AI diagnoses the breakdown.
Right, it brings in some really specific psychological research.
It introduces this concept called moral typecasting, or moral contagion. The research shows that when you describe a morally charged position out loud, the social cognition of the people listening to you immediately goes to work on a subconscious level.
Wait, pause for a second. Let's make sure I'm getting the mechanics of this.
Sure.
You're saying that just by allowing the words of a bad idea to leave my mouth, even in a totally detached summary, the badness basically rubs off on me in the minds of my listeners.
Yes. The contagion is automatic. First, because you are the one verbalizing the position, you become associated with it through a basic psychological similarity heuristic.
That is wild.
And secondly, if the position involves moral harm, you take on the moral coloring of that harm. The AI points out something crucial here.
What's that?
A verbal disclaimer saying, I don't believe this, I'm just playing devil's advocate. It does almost nothing to neutralize this mechanism.
Nothing at all.
Very little. Brain imaging studies on how we process moral judgments show that the association happens faster than the rational processing of the disclaimer.
Yeah.
You literally cannot just verbally declare yourself neutral and expect human social cognition to obey.
I mean, I have to push back on this a little because the user in the transcript struggles with this too. Is this just an inability for some people to understand hypothetical arguments?
How do you mean?
Like, I remember seeing this street interview where a guy was asked, if you didn't have breakfast today, how would you feel? And the guy just kept getting angry, shouting, but I did have breakfast.
Oh, I've seen that.
He literally couldn't hold the counterfactual in his head. So are these university scientists just failing to grasp a hypothetical? The AI is very careful to untangle that, actually, because conflating those two phenomena leads to a very arrogant misdiagnosis.
Yeah, okay, so what is the difference?
The Brixist example is a failure of what psychologists call cognitive decoupling. That's the mental ability to hold a representation in your mind, a hypothetical scenario, while keeping it completely quarantined from your actual beliefs about the real world.
Right, so it's the ability to play in the sandbox of ideas without believing the sand is real.
Exactly. And that ability correlates very strongly with fluid intelligence. But the AI clarifies that the user's colleagues were not failing at cognitive decoupling.
Because they were scientists.
Right. Their daily lab work required intense hypothetical reasoning and variables. The breakdown wasn't about intelligence at all.
It was about conversational genres, wasn't it?
Yes. The text brings in sociolinguistic research distinguishing between report talk and rapport talk.
Let's walk through those mechanics. What does that actually look like on the ground?
Well, in report talk, the goal of the conversation is the pure exchange of data. The underlying assumption is that the speakers are autonomous individuals passing information back and forth.
Okay, makes sense. And report talk.
In rapport talk, the primary function of the conversation is relationship maintenance. It is about establishing connection, checking social alignment, and reinforcing the cohesion of the group.
And the research suggests women tend to utilize rapport talk more frequently to navigate social spaces, right?
Yes, though it's certainly not exclusively a gendered trait, but it changes the entire meaning of the interaction.
So if you are in a rapport talk environment and you say, let me lay out both sides of this horrific moral issue without endorsing either.
The listener's brain does not process that as a neutral data dump. In rapport mode, the stance you take is the relevant content of the conversation.
Wow.
There is no such thing as a neutral discursive position. The only question the listener is trying to answer is the meta question.
Which is what?
Where do you stand in relation to the group's safety and values?
So what does this all mean for us? It means your verbal disclaimer doesn't read as an intellectual suspension of belief. To someone in rapport mode, it reads as evasion. It reads as a refusal to align with the safety of the group, which they then interpret as a hidden allegiance to the threat.
That's spot on. The listener subconsciously backfills the missing stance based on the horrific content you are explaining. Trying to perfectly steelman both sides of a moral debate is just a communication style with a massive failure rate outside of like a formal debate setting.
That is incredibly practical, but also deeply frustrating for someone who just wants to analyze an argument.
It is.
And the user in the transcript takes this localized communication breakdown and extrapolates this massive conclusion.
Yeah, he takes a big leap there.
He basically says, look, this friction proves that mixed gender teams in the workplace are inherently less efficient. He claims when he was on all-male engineering teams, everything ran smoothly.
They exchanged data. They didn't worry about feelings.
Exactly. He says adding women makes it feel like dancing with someone with two left feet.
The AI handles this assertion with a lot of precision, relying on organizational psychology data to push back, while still validating the friction he actually experienced.
Right. It doesn't just call him wrong.
No. It brings up massive university studies on collective intelligence. Collective intelligence is essentially the team equivalent of an individual's IQ.
Meaning how well a group solves complex problems together?
Yes, and the research found that a team's collective intelligence actually correlates positively with the proportion of women on the team.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. Why would a higher proportion of women make a group objectively smarter at problem solving?
It's not because women possess higher individual IQs. It's mediated by two specific group dynamics:
Yes.
social sensitivity and conversational turn-taking.
Okay.
The studies found that mixed teams, and majority female teams tend to be vastly superior at cooperative synchronous communication.
Meaning they actually listen to each other.
Yes, they are better at reading the room, ensuring everyone's ideas are heard, and integrating diverse pieces of information. That synchronous communication solves complex, multivariable problems far better than a room full of individual geniuses working in silos.
But the AI acknowledges that the user felt like the team was moving slower. How do we square that contradiction?
This is a crucial distinction between subjective experience and objective output. The AI explains that all male teams often default to what sociologists call competitive interruption mode.
I know exactly what that is. It's rapid fire.
Yeah.
People talk over each other, you pitch an idea, someone shoots it down instantly, you pivot. It feels incredibly fast.
Right. And to someone who is socialized in that environment, competitive interruption mode feels like the natural speed of work.
So when you mix the team, that mode breaks down.
It feels like a slowdown. The user experienced real friction, a jarring mismatch in communication styles, but he incorrectly assumed that his preferred style was objectively superior for the actual output of the task.
Which the data flatly contradicts.
Completely.
And there is another layer to this workplace friction that the AI brings up, which I think is going to resonate deeply with anyone who has ever felt burned out in an office.
The office housework.
Yes. What are we talking about here specifically?
We are talking about the invisible labor required to keep a professional team functional. Conflict mediation, mood management,
Training the new hire who is struggling.
organizing the notes after a chaotic meeting, planning the social cohesion events that keep morale from collapsing. It is the connective tissue of the workplace.
Right. It's all the stuff that never, ever shows up on an annual performance review. You don't get a bonus for diffusing a tense standoff between two junior developers.
Exactly. And the data overwhelmingly shows that in mixed-gender teams, this unrewarded emotional and social labor disproportionately falls on high-performing individuals.
Usually women.
Most frequently women, yes, but also highly empathetic men.
Think about that for a second. If you are listening to this right now and you've ever felt utterly exhausted at work, not from your actual deliverables, but from the sheer crushing weight of managing your team's moods, you are not crazy.
It is a documented sociological phenomenon.
You are doing the office housework, and it is a massive invisible tax on your productivity.
And that invisible tax perfectly explains the user's frustration. He felt he was drowning in drama and hand-holding, entirely missing that the drama was actually the breakdown of an invisible labor system he had previously taken for granted.
Segregating the workplace doesn't solve the friction.
No, it just optimizes for a narrower type of problem solving while completely ignoring the complex social realities of modern work.
So if communication breakdowns are making it impossible to coordinate at the micro level in the office, how does that same structural breakdown scale up to the macro level of family survival?
That's where the transcript pivots, and it gets pretty grim.
It really does, because if you think the workplace is stressful, the text dives deep into the utter structural destruction of the American middle class.
It is a sobering section. The user expresses a profound grief over the loss of the pre-1970s middle class, and the AI validates this completely.
It doesn't tell him he's just being nostalgic.
Not at all. It lays out rigorous economic data showing how the substantive definition of the middle class was systematically dismantled, and then how the vocabulary was changed so we wouldn't notice the damage.
Let's define the baseline here, because we aren't talking about a vague feeling of mid-century Americana. What did it actually mean sociologically and economically to be middle class in the 1950s and 60s?
The standard mid-century labor economics definition was highly concrete. It meant a single full-time income was sufficient to support a household.
One income.
One income. It meant home ownership, typically secured by a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, reliable transportation, and a defined benefit pension provided by the employer.
Meaning retirement risk was carried by the company, not the individual worker.
Exactly.
And crucially, this is the part that blew my mind. It meant having 6 months of liquid savings, the working reserve.
Yes, the cushion. 6 months of savings to absorb ordinary risk. If the breadwinner got laid off, the family had half a year to find new income without falling into poverty.
So the defining feature of the historic middle class wasn't consumer goods.
No, it wasn't about having a nicer television or a faster car.
It was security.
The defining feature was absolute security. The ability to absorb a broken furnace, a medical bill, or a period of unemployment without it becoming a catastrophic crisis.
Okay, so that was the baseline. Now, walk me through the mechanics of how that was destroyed, because it didn't just vanish into thin air.
The AI relies on deep political economy literature here to document how, starting in the late 1970s, a coordinated series of policy changes fundamentally altered the economy.
Like what?
We are talking about severe changes to the tax code that favored capital gains over wage labor, the sweeping deregulation of the financial sector.
And the gutting of antitrust enforcement.
Right, which allowed massive corporate consolidation alongside the systematic weakening of labor laws and union power.
What did that actually do on the ground, mechanically?
Mechanically, it decoupled productivity from median wages. From roughly 1948 to 1973, there was a strict parallel. As workers produced more value per hour, their wages went up in tandem.
They shared in the growth.
Yes. But after 1973, productivity continued to soar, skyrocketed actually, due to technology and globalization, but median wages went completely flat.
All that extra value just went somewhere else.
The surplus value was redirected upward to executives and shareholders.
And the user specifically points to NAFTA in the 1990s as the final lock on the door. How did free trade agreements mechanically suppress wages?
The AI explains that these agreements didn't just lower tariffs, they functioned as a structural lock-in.
Meaning what?
By allowing capital to move freely across borders to find the cheapest possible labor while keeping labor trapped within national borders, it destroyed the bargaining power of the American worker.
Ah, I see. If a union threatened to strike for higher wages,
The company could credibly threaten to move the factory to Mexico. It bound this new wage-suppressing architecture into international treaty law, making it nearly impossible for domestic Democratic majorities to vote to reverse it.
but wait, a lot of people listening might say, sure, wages flatlined for individuals, but households got richer because women entered the workforce in massive numbers. Two incomes are better than one, right?
That brings us to one of the most counterintuitive points in the transcript. The research on this explains the grand illusion of the modern economy.
Walk me through it. Because mathematically, two incomes should equal more wealth.
Mathematically, absolute household income went up. But economists looked at what families were spending that second income on.
And it wasn't vacations.
No, they didn't double their discretionary wealth. They didn't buy a second house or double their savings. Instead, because millions of households suddenly had dual incomes, they used that extra money to bid against each other for fixed necessities.
Primarily housing, right?
Yes, housing in neighborhoods with decent public schools.
So families were bidding up the cost of a middle-class life until the second income was entirely absorbed by the new baseline cost.
Exactly. Two incomes today essentially buy the exact same standard of living that one income bought in 1970. The cost of admission to the middle class just doubled.
And it actually made families vastly more fragile.
How so?
Think about the risk. In the 1950s, you had a built-in safety net. If the working husband got sick or laid off, the stay-at-home wife could theoretically enter the workforce to keep the family afloat.
She was the reserve labor capacity.
Exactly. Today, both parents are already working at maximum capacity just to pay the mortgage and childcare. If one of them loses a job, the math breaks instantly.
The entire financial structure collapses.
They're carrying double the employment risk with zero backup capacity.
Which is why the definition of the middle class had to be changed. The AI points out that today, when politicians or economists use the term middle class, they're using a moving goalpost.
They just mean the statistical middle of the income bell curve.
Right. They are literally just talking about the 15th percentile of earners.
Yeah.
They stripped it of its substantive meaning.
It no longer guarantees security at all. If we apply the old 1960s standard, a single income, a pension, 6 months cash, a massive portion of today's statistical middle class would actually be classified as the working poor.
Because they are living paycheck to paycheck.
One minor emergency away from ruin.
Right.
The vocabulary was changed so we wouldn't have to confront the material decline.
And that idea that our vocabulary masks the reality of how power operates leads perfectly into the next major concept,
Yeah.
cognitive capture,
Yeah, and this is where we get back to that Bud Light example from the beginning of the deep dive.
the marketing disaster.
Right. To recap, a major beer company made a highly controversial marketing choice, alienated their core demographic, and billions in market cap were wiped out. And everyone thought, wow, they miscalculated the profit.
Because we have been conditioned, almost from birth, to believe that a corporation's singular motivation is to maximize profit.
Exactly. But the user argues that at the highest echelons of corporate power, maybe money wasn't the goal. Maybe the profit loss was an acceptable cost to achieve a different objective.
And the AI validates this hypothesis by introducing a classic economic concept about fictitious commodities. and this idea of the economization of everything.
What does that actually mean?
It means we live in a market society that has fundamentally rewired our brains. We have been conditioned to believe that non-monetary motivations are literally illegible.
We can't even see them.
Right, we're trained to always just follow the money. We view every human action as an economic calculation. So when a massive corporation does something that seemingly destroys its own revenue, we assume it's a mistake.
Because we lack the cognitive framework to imagine they might be optimizing for something else entirely?
Exactly.
The transcript uses an analogy that I think crystallizes this perfectly. Imagine someone manages to control all the water in the world, a total water monopoly. At that point, they aren't competing to sell you water anymore. They don't need to maximize their water revenue because they have all of it.
So what do they do with it?
They use their control of it to manage the population. If the population is conditioned to only think in terms of buying and selling water, they will never look up and ask who controls the reservoir.
That is a profound metaphor for modern global capital. At the absolute highest levels of elite power, money undergoes a phase change.
A phase change.
Yes, it is no longer something you try to accumulate. It is a condition that you defend. You have so much capital that acquiring an extra $1 billion is mathematically meaningless to your lifestyle.
What matters is defending the structural conditions that keep you in power.
Precisely. So if we apply this back to the marketing executives in that controversy,
How does the AI read their actions if not through profit?
the AI offers two readings. First, on an individual level, the marketing executives weren't optimizing for the company's bottom line. They were optimizing for their own peer status.
Status within their specific social class.
Right. The credentialed urban managerial elite. The shareholders might have lost $1 billion, but the executive gained immense social capital at their next industry award show.
The company's money was just the currency they spent to buy personal status.
Exactly. And the second reading is that the campaign was a structural signal sent from the top down.
A message to their traditional working class base.
Yes. A message that their cultural preferences are no longer relevant, and that the institutions they patronize are being fundamentally reoriented. The temporary revenue loss is simply the necessary cost of establishing the new cultural baseline.
So if you are only ever looking for the financial motive, you are flying blind. A population trained to only recognize monetary motives is structurally incapable of perceiving how real power operates.
You are staring at the quarterly earnings report while they rewrite the social contract.
Which forces us to ask the inevitable question. If the people at the top aren't chasing daily profits, how exactly does this elite class preserve and wield its power on a global scale?
To answer that, the transcript moves into the concept of the transnational oligarchy. And we need to be incredibly precise with our terms here.
Yeah, because the user initially throws around words like plutocracy and oligarchy interchangeably.
And the AI actually stops him to draw a very sharp distinction.
Right. A plutocracy is strictly rule by wealth. The wealthy rule simply because they have money and they buy influence in a democratic system.
It's relatively open. If you get rich enough, you join the plutocracy.
But the AI says we aren't dealing with a simple plutocracy, we are dealing with an oligarchy.
Specifically, a transnational oligarchy. Oligarchy means rule by the few. Wealth is a factor, yes, but it is not the only criterion.
So what is the defining factor?
Institutional position. This is a narrow, self-perpetuating class that uses institutional power to rule. We are talking about central bankers, the directors of massive global NGOs, intelligence agency chiefs.
The executives of transnational asset management firms.
Yes. A central banker might only have a net worth of a few $1 million, modest by billionaire standards, but their institutional position gives them more power over the global economy than almost any individual billionaire.
And the financial infrastructure this oligarchy uses to detach themselves from national accountability is staggering. The transcript dives deep into the mechanics of the offshore trust system.
Because again, this starts happening right around the 1970s.
The exact same time the middle class is getting crushed.
Exactly. With the end of the Bretton Woods system and the rise of eurodollars, the global elite began moving wealth offshore.
We should define eurodollars quickly. As the AI points out, this was the catalyst. Hold on, what actually is a eurodollar? Is it a European currency?
No, the name is misleading. A eurodollar is simply a U.S. dollar deposited in a bank outside the jurisdiction of the United States.
Okay.
In the 1970s, as global trade exploded, massive amounts of U.S. dollars ended up in banks in London or elsewhere. Because they were outside the U.S., They were not subject to the Federal Reserve's banking regulations.
It created a shadow banking system.
A massive pool of unregulated, globally mobile capital.
And that pool birthed the modern offshore trust system. The numbers cited in the transcript are almost incomprehensible. Economists estimate roughly $12 trillion is hidden offshore.
And other estimates suggest that when you include corporate assets and shell companies, it might be closer to 30 or even 50 trillion.
Walk through the mechanics of how that actually works,
What?
because it's not a pirate chest buried on an island.
No, it's highly legalistic. If you're a multi-billionaire, you set up a trust, perhaps in a state with secretive trust laws or in the Cayman Islands.
Right.
That trust owns a shell company in Ireland. That shell company holds the patents to your intellectual property. So when your company makes billions of dollars in the U.S., it pays massive licensing fees to the shell company.
Effectively shifting the profit out of the high-tax country into a zero-tax haven, the wealth is legally disappeared from the tax base.
$50 trillion removed from the social contract of the nations where that wealth was generated.
This is the material infrastructure of the transnational oligarchy.
It completely changes the bargaining power. It allows capital to be instantly globally mobile, while labor remains trapped within national borders, subject to the taxes the elite have escaped.
To explain how this dynamic looks to us on the ground, the AI brings in this brilliant framework distinguishing between the dignified parts of government and the efficient parts.
Yes, from a 19th century political analysis.
Right. It argues that the monarchy is the dignified part. It's the ceremony, the figurehead, the thing the public sees and emotionally attaches to.
But the drab bureaucrats working in the background, they are the efficient part. They actually run the machinery.
Apply that to today. Think about the national politicians we elect, the people we scream about on cable news. The transcript argues they are just the dignified layer.
They are the public puppets fighting over the daily management.
But the efficient layer, the people actually writing the rules of global trade and determining resource allocation, is the transnational oligarchy. We are fighting over who gets to wear the crown, missing the fact that the oligarchs own the castle.
This raises an important question, though. Haven't we always had elites? Didn't wealthy industrialists run things 100 years ago?
What makes this new managerial oligarchy so much more alienating to the average person?
This is where the transcript gets into the great ethos shift. It argues there has been a fundamental moral shift in the ruling class.
Before the 1960s, America was largely run by the WASP establishment, right?
Yes, the old East Coast prep school country club network. And that old elite, for all its glaring flaws and bigotry, operated on a specific moral ethos, a custodial ethic.
Because they believed their status was largely inherited, they felt it carried a burden. They owed a duty of service to the nation.
But the new elite, the managerial class that displaced them, operates on an entirely different moral framework.
Walk me through how that transition happened.
The transition happened through the rise of credentialism and the meritocracy. Post-WWII, the old hereditary networks were slowly dismantled in favor of academic achievement. Elite schools started admitting students based on test scores.
The idea was to create a perfectly fair, merit-based society. But there is a dark side to that.
A very dark side. The new meritocratic elite believes they earned their position entirely through their own raw intelligence and their 80-hour work weeks.
And if you genuinely believe you earned your exalted status entirely on your own merit, what do you owe the people below you?
Absolutely nothing.
Worse than nothing, actually. The research points out that the new elite views the failures of the working class not as a tragedy requiring help, but as empirical evidence of moral and intellectual unfitness.
If you are poor in a perfect meritocracy, they think it's because you aren't smart enough or you hold backwards views.
Which leads to the secession of the elites.
They have seceded geographically into gated zip codes where they never interact with regular people. They seceded economically offshore, and they seceded culturally.
The relationship shifted from custodial to extractive, and sometimes actively hostile. They view traditional working class values with open contempt.
Which naturally leads the human user in the transcript to a very dark conclusion. He looks at this massive, coordinated destruction of the middle class, the hidden trillions, the hostile elite.
And he throws his hands up and says, okay, this is clearly a coordinated assault. Who is the guy in the secret volcano lair pulling the strings?
Right. Is it a multi-century conspiracy?
And honestly, looking at all this data, it's hard not to ask the same thing. How do you have this level of coordination without an email thread?
And here is where the AI delivers the most profound structural insight in the entire deep dive. It introduces the concept of environmental coordination.
Structural coordination without a coordinator. I really need you to walk me through the mechanics of this. How do you have a conspiracy without conspirators?
You don't need a directing intelligence if the environment itself selects for certain behaviors. The AI uses sociological models to explain this. Let's use the concept of deeply ingrained habits and social dispositions.
Okay, give me a concrete, everyday example before we scale it up to global oligarchs.
Think about a high school cafeteria. You have the popular kids. There is no secret cabal of popular kids meeting at midnight to dictate the exact brand of sneakers everyone must wear.
There is no memo.
No memo. Yet somehow, all the popular kids magically start wearing the exact same clothes and shunning the exact same people. How?
Because the social environment exerts selection pressure.
Exactly. If you wear the wrong shoes, you lose status. The teenagers self-police their own behavior based on a shared understanding of what gains them status.
So they coordinate perfectly without explicitly communicating a plan.
Now scale that up to a major institution like national journalism. A reporter at a prestige newspaper isn't pulled into a smoky back room and handed a memo saying, "Do not cover the negative impacts of mass immigration on working class wages."
That cartoonish coercion doesn't happen, but the outcome is the same as if it did. How?
Because the environment does the filtering. A reporter who does try to cover that story aggressively will find their pitch gently rejected by editors as not the right angle.
They won't get the front page assignments.
They won't get the book deals. Over time, the profession naturally sorts itself. It elevates people whose internalized habits already align with the interests of the elite class.
They intuitively know what the correct narrative is without being told. And the terrifying genius of this system is that the journalists themselves don't feel like they are part of a conspiracy.
They genuinely experience themselves as making independent, free, professional judgments.
And the AI uses an amazing historical metaphor to explain this dynamic at the highest levels of power. The court of King Louis XIV.
It's such a vivid visual. Think of the absolute monarchy of 17th century France.
The king didn't actually need to micromanage his hundreds of powerful nobles to keep them from rebelling.
Instead, he created a social configuration, the court at Versailles. He moved all the nobles into this gilded cage where they were forced to constantly surveil each other.
Competing for tiny, seemingly meaningless status symbols, like who gets the honor of holding the king's shirt when he wakes up.
They managed each other. The system's stability came from the courtiers' own desperate, paranoid competition for relative position.
That is the modern transnational elite. They are the courtiers. They surveil each other at elite summits and peer-reviewed journals, on the boards of universities.
They are terrified of losing their status within the configuration, so they police themselves.
When you see every major corporation and media outlet moving in absolute lockstep on a new ideological trend overnight, it's not a guy pushing a button on his desk. It's a shared class interest operating through social panic.
Everyone is just terrified of losing their invitation to the court, and this is a far more terrifying reality than a secret cabal.
Because a cabal makes mistakes and its leaders can be exposed. But environmental coordination is an emergent property of the system itself.
The system is the coordination.
But the AI points out that building the system, offshoring the wealth, dismantling the middle class, wasn't just an economic project. It required a massive philosophical shift in how everyday people view human life.
The transcript traces this back to a philosophical pivot in the 1970s, the shift from teleological emancipation to negativistic emancipation.
Walk me through those definitions. What does teleological mean here?
Before the 1970s, the dominant moral framework of the West believed that human life had a specific, defined goal, a purpose. Human nature was something to be molded to achieve that purpose.
So flourishing didn't mean doing whatever you wanted. It meant forming your character to achieve your duties, like the family wage we talked about earlier.
Earning enough to support a family was viewed as a profound moral achievement. It required sacrifice and delaying gratification. You flourished by meeting your obligations.
But the new framework is negativistic or therapeutic. It rejects the idea of a shared human purpose.
Instead, it views the constraints of embodied human life biology, marriage vows, intergenerational duties as oppressive constraints imposed on an authentic inner self.
The definition of freedom inverted. It's no longer freedom to fulfill your duty. It is now freedom from any unchosen obligation.
The transcript provides tangible examples of this. Take marriage. Over the last 50 years, it was recoded in popular media.
It went from being a foundational good of society, a building block you sacrifice for, to being portrayed as a form of personal captivity that is heroically relieved by divorce.
Motherhood underwent a similar redefinition. It was increasingly framed not as a societal role, but as a biological imposition on individual autonomy.
Even intergenerational wisdom, a grandmother teaching a mother how to raise a child, was displaced by therapeutic language generated by isolated professionals.
Think about the phrases we hear constantly now. Find your truth. Set your boundaries. Cut toxic people out of your life to protect your peace.
The AI argues this isn't just harmless pop psychology. It is the end result of a 50-year shift away from communal duty and toward absolute isolation.
It's a vocabulary of isolation masquerading as empowerment. And the AI makes a profound legal point about how this shift was codified.
Right, the legal framework.
The Enlightenment legal order was built on procedural neutrality, but it relied entirely on a moral substrate to function. The founders assumed people would use their freedom to pursue virtue.
But once that moral substrate was exhausted, the procedural framework started actively eating the culture.
The AI traces this legal history directly, pointing to Supreme Court jurisprudence from the mid-1960s into the 70s.
Break down the mechanics of that. How did the courts dismantle the moral substrate?
The court established a right to privacy, but the legal mechanism was substantive due process. The AI argues this was the turning point where the law moved from being neutral to actively excluding substantive moral content.
The state essentially declared it could no longer define the good life. Freedom was officially redefined as pure individual procedural autonomy, the right to be left alone by any moral constraints.
Which brings us to the emotional climax of the entire transcript. We've spent this hour mapping out a devastating landscape.
We've traced the destruction of the middle class, the offshoring of trillions, the rise of a hostile elite, and the dismantling of community duty.
And the human user in the text is staring at this exact same wreckage. And he is profoundly angry. He is grieving.
He says a line that is incredibly haunting. He says, "My life was hellish because I trusted the lies I was told."
He feels like he was robbed of a functional society. And in his profound grief, he keeps reaching for that single, multi-century cabal to blame.
He starts pulling in dark, paranoid conspiracy tropes about who is really running the world.
And the AI's response to him here is a masterclass in empathy. It doesn't mock him. It validates his pain.
It tells him that being raised on the lies of the old social contract and then having to rebuild a working picture of the world from the rubble is genuinely disorienting.
But the AI gently refuses to let him use the conspiracy theory as a crutch. It explains the psychological mechanism of false consolation.
Why is a terrifying global cabal a consolation? That seems counterintuitive to me.
Because when you are deeply hurt by massive, messy systemic failures, the idea that the world is just chaotic, that institutions naturally degrade through entropy, is deeply unsatisfying.
It doesn't give the pain a shape. It doesn't offer a specific target for the anger.
Finding a secret group to blame feels like an awakening. It feels like you are finally seeing the hidden truth, but it's actually a false consolation that closes your mind into a darker, more paranoid world.
Conspiracy theories are seductive precisely because they offer order in a chaotic world. A world ruled by an evil cabal is still a world with rules.
It implies that someone is at the steering wheel. The much more terrifying reality is that the system is running on autopilot.
The environmental coordination is selecting for terrible outcomes, the elite are blindly optimizing for their own status, and absolutely no one is driving the car.
The tragedy of the transcript is that the user's diagnosis of the brokenness is incredibly accurate. But his desperate need for a single villain prevents him from accepting the complex reality of how power actually operates.
It's a profound warning about how grief and alienation can curdle into paranoia. Okay, let's take a breath and look at the map we've drawn today.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We started at the micro level, exploring how communication fundamentally fails when we try to neutrally exchange data in a rapport-driven world. We unpacked the hidden friction of the modern workplace.
From there, we charted the structural dismantling of the middle class. We saw how deregulation flatlined wages and how two incomes became a trap that bid up the cost of necessities.
We looked at how our minds are captured by the idea of profit maximization, blinding us to how executives optimize for status. We exposed the true infrastructure of the transnational oligarchy, hiding tens of trillions offshore.
We tracked the cultural shift from a custodial elite to a hospital managerial class. We analyzed how these elites coordinate through environmental selection, the modern court of Versailles.
And finally, we explored the philosophical shift toward negativistic emancipation and the psychological trap of seeking false consolation in conspiracy theories. It is a massive amount to take in.
But understanding the actual mechanisms of how the ground is moving beneath our feet is the only way to stop being surprised by the earthquakes.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with a final thought directly related to your own daily life. Think about your own workplace, your own industry, or the media you consume every single day. Look around the room.
Ask yourself who is really making the choices.
How much of what you assume are independent, free, rational choices are actually just the result of environmental coordination? Are you actually playing the game, or is the environment quietly, relentlessly selecting your moves for you?
If you don't understand the environment you're operating within, you are destined to be shaped by it without ever knowing why.
Something to mull over the next time you find yourself nodding along with the consensus in the room. Remember, a map that looks perfectly clean and simple is probably hiding the fault lines. You have to look deeper. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of modern society. Stay curious, stay critical, and we will see you next time.